They say family is supposed to be a safe harbor, but what happens when that very harbor casts you out? Few people talk about it, but the deepest pain isn't loneliness. It's being rejected by the very ones you raised with love and care. My daughter looked me straight in the eyes and told me I had to leave home, to make room for her stepfather. Sounds absurd, doesn't it? And yet that's the silent reality in many families, where respect gets traded for convenience. But here's the paradox. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't beg. I didn't bow down. While they thought they had won, I carried a truth that could flip everything upside down. And that's the real detail, the calm in the middle of humiliation, that turned my story into a lesson of silent revenge and liberation. You'll see how a single phone call, backed by evidence most would overlook, was enough to shatter arrogance, strip away masks, and restore my dignity in front of everyone. If you've ever been made to feel like there's no longer a place for you in your own family, this story will show you that there are still ways forward, and the turnaround might be closer than you think. That dinner, which seemed like just another family gathering, taught me something I'll never forget. The greatest betrayals don't come from strangers, but from the people you least expect. When Sarah opened her mouth and told me I should leave so she and Mark could start fresh, it wasn't just a phrase. It was a deep cut, as if I no longer belonged in the family I had built. Have you ever noticed how certain words carry more weight than any punch? That's exactly how it felt. And it wasn't the first time I faced humiliation in my own home. But this time, it came disguised as a new beginning. That phrase, which could have meant hope, was used as a sentence against me, as if I were an old piece of furniture, no longer useful, needing to be hauled away. Dignity evaporates when love and care are replaced with selfishness. Have you ever felt that moment, when you realize you're no longer seen as a person, but as an obstacle? As she spoke, my eyes weren't on her but on the plate in front of me. The food grew cold, and all I could think was, when did my daughter, who once ran into my arms asking for help with homework, begin to treat me like an intruder? Family ties are fragile, and when the thread of respect snaps, the entire fabric unravels. The irony is bitter. A dinner table, meant to symbolize unity, turned into a silent courtroom. Have you ever sat at a dinner where the food lost all flavor because of the heavy atmosphere? It's striking how the environment changes everything. Just as a compliment can sweeten the simplest meal, betrayal has the power to sour even a feast. That's why I say, the emotions behind our words feed more than the food itself. Try this. Say something kind before serving dinner, and you'll see the taste change. There, swallowed by silence, I learned a harsh truth. Sometimes the greatest courts aren't found in courthouses with judges, but at family tables. Every look, every gesture, every careless word can turn into a verdict. And when that verdict comes from the ones you love, the pain is unmatched. It's like being expelled not just from a house, but from the very story you helped build. I always believed family meant support and respect, but that dinner showed me even those pillars can crumble when dignity is traded for convenience. It made me reflect on the importance of teaching gratitude early on. Want a practical tip? Ask your kids to write down 3 things they're grateful for every day. It sounds simple, but it trains the heart to value the people who stand beside them. As I chewed the silence, I realized Sarah's every word was putting me on trial. No jury, no defense. Just me, standing accused of no longer being useful. It was as if she had forgotten every sleepless night I spent caring for her. Have you noticed how people's memory becomes selective when it suits them? They remember what benefits them, but erase what inconveniences. Do you know what kept me steady in that moment? The certainty that humiliation isn't a final sentence, it's just a chapter. Revenge, in its truest sense, isn't about hurting back, but about proving, with dignity, that you will not bend. It's like chess. The player who looks cornered is often setting up checkmate. And I knew the game wasn't over. That night I learned something. Education isn't measured by a diploma on the wall, but by how we treat those who gave us our foundation. Sarah had schooling. She had everything a good daughter could ask for, but she lacked the most essential thing, respect. And that one detail changes everything in a family. Do you know someone with plenty of degrees but no character? Titles don't fill the emptiness left by a lack of gratitude. And even though the emotion was suffocating me, I took a deep breath. Because true freedom isn't about storming out. It's about staying in control when everyone expects you to fall apart. When you hold back your reaction, you're already halfway to victory. It's like when someone cuts you off in traffic. The strongest answer isn't honking or yelling. It's smiling and moving on. That's the power of not letting others rule you. At that dinner, I realized I wasn't just losing physical space. They were trying to strip me of my place as a father. But let me tell you, a father's title isn't taken away by words. It's engraved in memories, in gestures, in blood. You can try to erase it, but the truth always finds a way. Have you seen how a tiny flame can reignite a dead fireplace? That was the fire rising inside me. The plate in front of me looked like a mirror, cold, untouched, lifeless. That's exactly how I felt hearing I should leave. But here's the strange thing. Even emptiness can be fertile. Sometimes being pushed out of a place is just what forces you to rediscover your own worth. And in that rediscovery, you find a strength no one can take from you. I know it sounds harsh, but life teaches us, through dinners like that even betrayal has a lesson. It shows us what never to repeat with those we love. Want a simple example? If someone has ever made you feel invisible, make it your mission to look people in the eyes. A look can restore more than 1,000 words. And in that moment, as Sarah kept talking, I wondered, does she even realize the weight of every word? Because, my friend, words aren't rubber, bullets. They're arrows that pierce through generations. What's said at a dinner table can echo into the lives of grandchildren not even born yet. And that's where the true responsibility lies, either building strong family bonds or destroying them in seconds. The pain I felt wasn't just rejection. It was the sensation of being erased from my own story. And if you've ever felt that, you know how much it cuts. But you also know that from that place of pain comes a silent kind of revenge, the one that doesn't need shouting, only strength. And without Sarah or Mark realizing it, I was already preparing to turn that trial into something much greater. Because deep down, every dinner table can turn into a courtroom. And if that night I was the accused, soon I would prove I knew how to defend myself, and maybe even flip the verdict. Mark looked at me with that air of ownership and let out a word that pierced my chest like a blade. Burden. It wasn't just an insult. It was a stamp meant to, reduce me to dead weight. What hurt most wasn't just hearing it from him, but seeing Sarah stay silent, as if her silence confirmed it. You know what I learned? Silence can be far crueler than any scream. Words have a power few acknowledge. A single cruel phrase can stick with someone for years, eating away inside, long after the one who said it has forgotten. Has it ever happened to you? Something you heard as a child or teenager that you still remember like it was yesterday? That's the weight of words. They plant invisible roots that, if not pulled out, grow into towering trees of humiliation. That night I realized it wasn't about physical space. It wasn't about needing one less room in the house. It was about being erased from the story I had built with sweat, love, and sacrifice. And when I understood that, something inside me caught fire. I would not be complicit in my own erasure. Dignity is not for sale, not even when people try to buy it with silence. Let me give you a practical example. If someone at work has ever tried to belittle you, you know how heavy that feels. But notice, what really stings isn't the explicit criticism. It's when everyone else stays quiet, as if they agree. That kind of humiliation is betrayal in silence. And it's proof that whether in family, work, or friendships, relationships only survive when there's courage to stand up for what's right. Mark's words echoed in me, but Sarah's silence screamed louder. There is no greater betrayal than watching the one you raised, the one you taught, stay silent in the face of your humiliation. And let me tell you, when that happens, it isn't the end of the story. It's the beginning of the most silent form of revenge. Not revenge of destruction, but of liberation. Because the greatest victory is proving, through actions, that you are not the burden they claim you are. Have you noticed how certain words shape the way we see ourselves? A child called stupid often grows up believing it. A father called a burden might without strength bend to that label. That's why we must shield our hearts with self-respect. If you don't believe in your own worth, any word can knock you down. I remember as a young man, a teacher once told me I would never amount to anything. It hurt, but it also fueled me. Today, when I think of Mark calling me a burden, I realize certain phrases only carry the weight we allow, and maybe that's the lesson. Use the insult as a step up, not as a prison. If someone says you can't, answer with results. You've probably noticed the most painful words aren't always the harshest. Sometimes a simple "you don't belong" hurts far more than any curse word, because it's not just an insult, it's exclusion, it's ripping away identity, and when that happens inside your own home, the pain multiplies. After all, if you're not accepted in your own house, where else could you be? But here's the point. Those who wound with words don't always realize what they're doing. Many hide behind sarcasm as a shield for their own insecurity. Mark called me a burden because deep down, He needed to pretend he had power he never truly had. People like him are everywhere. They put others down because they don't know how to stand tall without stepping on someone. Sarah's silence, even harder to bear, made me reflect on the kind of education we give. I always thought teaching math or grammar was enough, but I forgot something. Teaching how to defend what's right. Families can't survive if we stay passive in the face of injustice. Want some real advice? Teach your kids to say, "I don't agree," when someone is humiliated, even if it makes things uncomfortable. That's what real respect looks like. At that table, I realized my humiliation reflected a collective failure. It wasn't just about Mark insulting me. It was about Sarah choosing the comfort of a false peace. How many times in your life have you swallowed your pride just to avoid conflict? But here's the truth. Every one of those silences is a brick in the prison of your own soul. The price of avoiding conflict is often your dignity. As I chewed on that insult, I understood my revenge wouldn't come instantly. I wouldn't rise from the table to scream or slam my fist. No, I would do something else. Turn that pain into strategy. Because instead of responding on the same level as the offense, I had to rise above it. The most powerful revenge is proving calmly that no one can erase you from your own story. Here's a little exercise. Next time someone calls you something negative, ask yourself, does this define who I am, or just what the other person sees? Then list 3 things that prove the opposite. For example, if someone calls you useless, write down 3 accomplishments that prove your worth. Simple, but it strengthens your dignity and diffuses the sting of the insult. And I'll admit, in that moment, inside, I wanted to explode, but an inner voice whispered, wait, because liberation isn't running away. It's waiting for the right moment to turn the table. Have you noticed how in life, the ones in the biggest hurry often fall first? That's why patience is sometimes the sharpest form of revenge. So while Mark smiled with arrogance and Sarah sat in silence, I already knew that word, burden, would stay etched in memory. But I also knew that soon, I would prove no one can strip away the worth of a man who built his life with sweat, and without them realizing, the game had already begun at that very table. As I gathered my things, every object felt heavy. It wasn't just a bag. It was the memory of a life being torn away from the place where it should have been honored. I opened an old box, and among yellowed papers and forgotten keepsakes, I found a photo of my wife smiling, holding little Sarah in her arms. The emotion hit me like lightning. How can someone betray their own roots? It's strange how small objects carry the power to revive entire stories. That picture wasn't just an image. It was proof of love, dedication, and sacrifice. Every line of her smile reminded me that dignity is not negotiable, and no humiliation could erase my worth as a father. Has it ever happened to you? You stumble upon something simple, a note, a letter, and it feels like it restores a part of you? There, in the silence of that room, I realized my revenge wouldn't be fueled by hatred. It would be fueled by memory. Because memory is a silent weapon. It reminds us who we really are when others try to erase us. I knew Sarah might have been blind in that moment, but that photograph was living proof that I wasn't a burden. I was the foundation that family was built on. Those boxes didn't just hold objects, they held dignity. An old watch, her diploma hanging on the wall, childhood drawings. Every piece was a reminder that the education I gave her wasn't in vain. And even if she tried to humiliate me, I carried tangible evidence of my presence and my role. Have you noticed how certain things we keep at home are really invisible contracts with our own history? I thought, if my wife were here, she would never allow this. And instead of crushing me, that thought gave me strength. Because love is also standing up in defense of the memory of those who can no longer speak. Betrayal hurts, but true memory heals. It was right there with that photo in my hand that I decided I would not let humiliation become fuel to erase our legacy. Those boxes became metaphors. Because the truth is, we all carry boxes inside us. Some filled with joy, others with pain. And when life tries to knock us down, it's up to us to choose which box to open. I could have opened the box of anger, but I chose the box of memory, and that gave me strength. Have you ever tried revisiting good memories on your hardest days? Try it. It works like medicine. In that moment, I promised myself I would never allow a cruel word to define my story. That photo was like a silent pact. George, don't forget who you are. It may sound sentimental, but even a simple picture can be the spark of liberation we need. Never underestimate the power of a small object. It can carry more weight than any speech. When I placed that photo back in the box, I wasn't just putting away paper. I was sealing a promise that my revenge wouldn't come with violence but with truth. Because at the end of the day, there's no sharper weapon than the living memory of what we've built with respect and dignity. That memory is what destroys the lie. Let me share something. I once met a man who carried a folded note in his pocket, written by his son when he was little, that said, "Dad, you're my hero." He told me that note saved his life on days he was humiliated at work. Do you know why? Because when you have something that reaffirms your worth, no one can convince you otherwise. These small proofs are shields against betrayal. I held that photo like a talisman, and I understood. Family isn't just living together, it's history. And history can't be torn up like paper. Sarah might kick me out, but she could never erase the chapters I wrote with so much love. That was the real liberation, realizing no one has the power to erase what has already been lived. As I closed the box, I thought about the importance of teaching the next generation to preserve memories, not just in photo albums, but in the heart. Because in moments of humiliation, it's those memories that restore self-respect. Want a practical exercise? Pick 3 objects that mark your life and keep them visible. They'll remind you every day that your story matters. I knew I was being pushed out, but every box I carried was also a reminder. You're not leaving defeated, you're leaving with evidence. That shift in perspective changed everything. Suddenly, I no longer saw myself as a victim, but as the guardian of a memory no one could steal. Have you noticed how, when you change the lens, even pain takes on a different meaning? There, among boxes and memories, I discovered something profound. The most beautiful revenge is preserving the memory of who we truly are. Betrayal tries to shrink us to the moment of the fall, but memory lifts us back up to the totality of our lives. I wasn't Mark's burden, nor Sarah's silence. I was the father who taught, the husband who loved, the man who built. And that certainty sparked a kind of emotion I can't quite describe. It wasn't anger, it wasn't sadness. It was a mix of pain and strength, as if my wife, through that photo, was whispering, "Keep going, it's not over." And deep down, I knew it wasn't ending there. It was just the beginning of something much bigger. I closed the box firmly, not just to protect objects, but to seal a pact with myself. Because I knew soon those papers, those photos, those memories would stop being keepsakes and become ammunition. And when the time came, no one would be able to deny the weight of the truth. Mark didn't have to raise his voice for his words to sound like a sentence. "You leave tonight." He spoke as if he owned everything, as if my whole life could be dismissed with one dry order. What stunned me was seeing Sarah hand him the keys, as if transferring authority to a stranger. That wasn't just betrayal. It was the denial of an entire life. Have you noticed how some people confuse authority with power? Real power comes from respect, from dignity, from character. Those who lack that try to impose themselves by force. Mark demanded I leave immediately because he thought fear would paralyze me. But fear, when channeled, can become fuel for liberation. As I stared at the keys dangling from his hand, I felt both humiliation and clarity. It wasn't just a piece of metal. It was the symbol of everything I had built and what they were trying to strip away. Have you ever seen something so simple carry such enormous meaning? That key was my whole portrait. Mark's ultimatum sounded final, but inside me a voice echoed, "Do not accept being forced out." That's a lesson for anyone who's ever been pressured unfairly. When you give in out of fear, you reinforce the oppressor's power. But when you stand firm, you prove dignity is not a bargaining chip. It's the foundation of every relationship, even family. I knew that if I left right then, it would be like admitting he was right. And revenge, in this case, wouldn't be yelling or shoving. It would be standing tall, calm. Want a practical example? In negotiations, when someone pressures you with, "Take it now or lose everything," the smartest move is to take a breath and refuse to cave. Because ultimatums, in reality, are confessions of weakness. Mark spoke with urgency, but I was thinking strategy. Like in chess, the player who rushes forward too fast opens themselves up to being taken down. I wasn't about to sacrifice my king just because he made noise with the pieces. Sarah, however, seemed blinded by the fear of opposing him, and her silence weighed heavier than his orders. The thing about ultimatums is they reveal more about the one giving them than the one receiving them. They expose insecurity, desperation. When someone says, "now or never," what they're really saying is, "I have no other options." And that's exactly what I saw in Mark. His urgency betrayed his weakness. The humiliation, as painful as it was, didn't break me. On the contrary, it strengthened me, because I realized the smartest revenge would be to use that very ultimatum against him. Have you noticed how certain threats become ammunition when saved for the right moment? That's exactly what I decided to do. Sarah, with trembling hands, handed over the keys as if she were giving away her very soul. I looked at her and thought, does she even understand what she's doing? Does she realize she's not just breaking with me, but with her own story? Broken family ties can't be mended with apologies alone. They require rebuilding, and every act of betrayal digs the hole deeper. In that instant, I felt a strange weight. It wasn't just pain, it was responsibility. Because when someone tries to strip you of your dignity, you have two choices: surrender it or prove it's non-negotiable. I chose the second. Have you noticed how the most decisive moments in life often happen in a matter of seconds? That was one of them. Mark smirked, convinced he had already won. But inside I smiled too, for a different reason. Because I knew his arrogance would create openings. When someone acts out of pride, they forget important details. And those details were exactly what I began to look for. It's strange how even an ultimatum can turn into an opportunity. Think about it. If someone pressures you to leave a place, maybe it's because you hold more power there than they want to admit. Mark wanted me gone, but he had no idea that, deep down, I held cards he could never play. That gave me serenity. I took a deep breath and thought of my wife, of that photo I had kept. She would surely tell me, don't give away your home, don't give away your story. And I promised myself that out of respect for her, and for me, I would not let that ultimatum unfold the way they imagined. A man's dignity cannot be evicted. And as I looked again at that key, I understood something. Destiny was in my hands, not his. Because a key doesn't just open doors, it opens paths of decision. And the decision I made, in silence, was simple. I would not leave defeated. And in time, it would be Mark who'd have to walk out the door. But of course, the street was already waiting for me, and I knew public exposure could be even crueler, and that's exactly where my story began to shift. I set my bags down on the sidewalk and felt the weight of humiliation settle with me. It wasn't just my luggage being exposed. It was my dignity, laid bare before curious eyes. The street, which had so often been just the path to work, now felt like a stage where I was the main character in a play of betrayal. And believe me, there is no curtain big enough to hide that pain. Neighbors began opening their windows. Some whispered, others just stared in silence. And I thought, how many times have I seen someone else in this position and failed to grasp the depth of their pain? Now I understood. The shame wasn't only in being cast out, but in having witnesses to the scene. Have you ever felt the weight of every gaze around you pressing down like tons? The cold sidewalk seemed to mock me. Each suitcase dropped there sounded like a sentence of failure. But amid that humiliation, there was a detail. The worried gaze of Mr. Henry, my oldest neighbor. He didn't speak right away, but the way he looked at me was enough to reignite a spark of self-respect. It's incredible how, in the middle of a crowd that watches passively, just one look of empathy can give you back your courage. That made me reflect. How many times have we seen someone humiliated and chosen not to intervene? Sometimes, a simple, "Are you okay?" is the thread that keeps a person from giving in to defeat. The street is a stage, but it can also be a school of humanity. I looked around and asked myself, did they only see a defeated man? Or could some of them sense that this scene was just the beginning of a turnaround? Because life is like that. The one who seems to fall in public is often just stepping back to gather strength. And I already knew. My revenge wouldn't come with shouting, but with proof. The shame was eating me alive, but it was also sharpening my awareness. Because the street, with its witnesses, was turning my pain into a collective story. Each neighbor would carry an echo of it, and in a way, that strengthened me. Have you noticed how responsibility grows heavier when everyone is watching? That's what gave me clarity. I couldn't collapse. Mr. Henry, still silent, only nodded in support. And that simple gesture was enough to remind me, dignity isn't lost when someone tries to take it. It's only lost if you hand it over. I took a deep breath and gripped the handle of my suitcase, as if I were also gripping my own story. The sidewalk had become an improvised courtroom. On one side, whispers that judged me. On the other, eyes waiting for my next move. And in that contrast, I realized public humiliation is a chance to show in silence your inner strength. It's no different than in the workplace. When criticism comes in front of everyone, the secret isn't to panic, but to act with strategy. Life has a way of using public stages to teach the hardest lessons. I was exposed there, but at the same time, I was preparing for that scene to become the fuel for my comeback. Because liberation doesn't happen behind closed doors. It happens when pain is laid bare, and you choose to remain standing. Have you noticed how how some moments feel endless? Every minute on that sidewalk stretched into an hour, but paradoxically that time gave me space to think, and thinking is the most powerful weapon against humiliation. Those who rush lose their way. Those who reflect find the exit. And through reflection, I realized I still had a card up my sleeve. While some eyes judged me, I remembered the photo I had tucked away, the folder still sitting in the office. It was as if the street was just the intermission between two acts, the fall and the revenge. I wasn't defeated. I was waiting for the next act. And anyone who's been to the theater knows, sometimes the silence on stage is what sets up the explosion to come. Mr. Henry's presence was crucial. He didn't need speeches. His look said it all. Don't bow down. That detail showed me the importance of having at least one person who truly sees you when everyone else chooses not to. Has it ever happened to you? One single person, in the middle of many, rescuing you with the smallest gesture? That's true respect. In that moment, I realized the street was mine too. I wasn't being thrown into nothingness. I was stepping into a public space where truths reveal themselves. And the truth was this. In front of the neighbors, Mark and Sarah were also exposed. Because those who humiliate in public forget, they too will be judged in public. That's the paradox. Humiliation never strikes just one person. I held my gaze, lifted my head, and decided, if they saw me as defeated, soon they'd see me as an example. The street, which felt like a stage of shame, would become a stage of justice. All I had to do was wait for the right moment to flip the scene. Because life doesn't end after the first act. There's always a second. And it was there, on that sidewalk, with my suitcase beside me, and Mr. Henry's look giving me strength, that I understood. Public humiliation would become fuel for something greater. The street, which felt like a prison, would be my arena, and I could already sense the next step would lead me straight to the secret I had kept in the office. Before leaving for good, I took a deep breath and walked toward my old office. Strange, really. Every step felt like a challenge, as if I were entering forbidden ground, but I knew that room held more than memories. Inside it rested the key to my freedom, and perhaps the silent revenge already taking shape within me. The office had always been my refuge. The walls held not just books and papers, but the memory of sleepless nights, completed projects, and dreams paid for in sweat. Funny how a simple room can become an extension of our soul. Have you noticed how certain places carry a unique energy? For me, that room was more than four walls. It was my trench. I opened the drawer carefully, as if handling something sacred, and there it was, the leather folder, locked, discreet, yet powerful. Inside it, contracts and property records, documents that carried my story and the value of everything they were trying to take from me. Holding it was like holding a silent weapon, not one of destruction, but of truth. It's remarkable how, in moments of betrayal, life hands you reminders. You're not as vulnerable as you think. That folder showed me that the humiliation they tried to impose would not be the final word. Because in the end, it's not the loudest voice that defines history, but the one holding the proof. As I ran my fingers over the worn leather, I felt something deeper than ownership. It was respect. It was as if each document whispered, "You built this, and no one can erase it." Have you ever stumbled upon a forgotten paper that completely changed a situation? That's how I knew in that moment everything would change. The folder wasn't just an object, it was a metaphor, proof that even when we're pushed out, there is always something that anchors us. That's why I always say, never underestimate the importance of keeping records, receipts, contracts. In times of crisis, they speak louder than 1,000 emotional speeches. I smiled to myself, remembering how often I'd heard people say, paper means nothing. What matters is trust. Nice to hear, but dangerous to live by. Because trust can be betrayed, but a signed document keeps dignity standing. Life taught me that paper isn't just paper. It's written memory that shields against betrayal. When I closed the folder, I felt I was holding more than a defense. I was holding the weapon for the turnaround. I no longer saw myself as a victim cast out, but as a strategist waiting for the right moment, like a card player quietly holding his trump without revealing it. Have you noticed how often the greatest strength lies in not showing what you have? As I carried the folder against my chest, I thought about life's irony. They believed they were pushing me out, but in truth, they were shoving me right into the center of the board, because soon I would prove the house was never theirs. And when that revelation came, it would free me and confront them in front of everyone. The office, once a place of silence, had become the stage of my decision. The closed folder was like a sealed verdict. All I needed was the right moment to open it. And I learned something. True revenge is not about rushing, it's about patience. Whoever waits for the right moment doesn't just win, they earn respect. I could already hear Mark's impatient footsteps outside. He had no idea that while he laughed at my supposed defeat, I carried in my hands the evidence of his downfall. That's why I always say, never underestimate the one who stays silent. Silence is often just preparation for the roar. With the folder under my arm, I felt a mix of emotion and relief. It was like carrying an invisible fortress, and I realized dignity isn't lost when you know who you are and what you've built. True freedom comes when you understand that your story is stronger than any momentary humiliation. Want some practical advice? Always keep what proves your journey. Certificates, records, even thank you notes. They may seem small, but one day they can become shields against injustice. Just like that. Folder was my shield that night. Proof speaks when words fail. As I left the office, I knew I wasn't just carrying papers. I was carrying the certainty that the humiliation I'd suffered on the street wasn't the end. It was only the intermission. Because when the time came, they would be the ones forced to face the weight of those documents. And with the folder firm in my hands, I walked slowly down the stairs, ready to return to the stage where it had all begun. Little did they know that when I stepped back into the scene, nothing would ever be the same again. When I returned to the door with the folder in hand, Mark burst into mocking laughter. "The police? They'll laugh at you too," he sneered, already counting himself the victor. I only breathed deeply, because life had taught me something. The laugh of arrogance is always the prelude to the fall. Those who laugh too soon rarely understand the depth of the game. Have you noticed how some people confuse noise with victory? Mark believed his laughter meant power, but in truth, it was just smoke and mirrors. Deep down, his confidence was a facade. People who humiliate others in public are often the very ones who fear the truth lurking in the shadows. I didn't answer his taunt, because I learned not every attack deserves an immediate response. In life, there are moments when silence is louder than any shout, and this was one of them. Because every second I held that folder, Mark lost a little more of the confidence he pretended to have. Want an example? Think about an argument at work. The person who stays calm while the other screams almost always leaves more respected. The laugh of arrogance might grab attention, but serenity is what earns credibility. With that mindset, I calmly dialed the emergency number on my phone. Mark laughed even louder when he saw me. "You're calling the cops? They'll laugh in your face, old man," he sneered, dripping with contempt. But I knew inside, that laugh was nothing but disguised nerves. Ever seen someone laugh too hard just to hide their fear? That's exactly what I was watching. As Sarah stayed silent, I realized betrayal shows itself in layers. On one side, Mark's offensive laughter. On the other, my own daughter's omission. And there I was in the middle, with a folder that held not just documents, but the symbol of my dignity. The humiliation was heavy, but the certainty of a turnaround weighed even more. I let Mark keep laughing, because I knew each of his laughs would echo later, as bitter irony at the moment of his fall. You know that saying, "He who laughs last, laughs best"? I prefer to adapt it. The one who laughs with respect never needs to laugh last, because their victory is constant. My decision to call the police didn't come from anger, but from reason. I knew revenge didn't need to be loud, it only needed to be just. And justice, when it arrives, has the power to turn laughter into silence. Have you ever seen how a simple truth can silence an entire room? That's exactly what I was about to witness. Mark leaned on the belief that no one would dare stand up to him. That's the classic mistake of the arrogant, thinking fear is permanent. But fear, once crossed, becomes courage. And courage doesn't need to shout, it simply acts. The touch of my fingers dialing the phone, in that moment, was stronger than any punch. As I typed, I remembered how many times in life people laugh at us before we recognize our own strength. I myself was once the target of jokes in my youth, when I dreamed of bigger things. But I learned something. Someone else's laughter doesn't define our destiny. It only shows how much they underestimate what we are capable of. Sarah's tearful eyes darted around, unsure where to look, and that detail taught me something. The silence of accomplices is always uncomfortable. They know they're wrong, but hide behind fear. Mark laughed, but Sarah trembled, as if deep down, she already foresaw what was coming. I stayed firm, never raising my voice, because dignity is proven in calm, not in shouting. Every step I took was calculated, every gesture part of a strategy Mark couldn't see. He laughed, but I was already writing the script of his downfall. Want a practical exercise for life? The next time someone laughs at you in mockery, don't respond immediately. Mark that laugh in your mind and use it as fuel to grow. Turn the insult into a project, an achievement, a concrete proof that you are greater. There is no sweeter revenge than turning ridicule into applause. Mark's laughter echoed through the room, but inside me there was no anger left, only focus. Because I knew that in just a few minutes those laughs would be replaced by the embarrassed silence of sirens. Life has its own sense of humor. It lets the arrogant laugh, only to show later who really gets the last word. And as I pressed the call button, I felt a strange peace, as if every second was part of a larger plan. Mark's laughter was just the prelude, the off-key music before the moment of truth. And in my mind, I could already hear the sirens approaching. The sirens began echoing down the street like a divine warning that the game was about to flip. The sound cut through the night, drawing neighbors closer, as if they were watching a show they hadn't bought tickets for. You could feel the emotion in the air. Each spin of red and blue lights on the house's facade was proof that humiliation wouldn't end the way they had expected. Mark, still wearing that mask of forced confidence, crossed his arms. He believed nothing would change, that the police would only confirm his authority, but the detail he overlooked was the folder in my hands. I didn't tremble, I didn't hesitate, I just waited. Because when you have truth on your side, you don't need to shout, you just show it. Sarah, on the other hand, panicked. Her tearful eyes betrayed the weight of her conscience. It's curious how, when sirens wail, the mask of false security crumbles. The guilty feel their hearts race, each beat a reminder that truth is closing in. I saw that in her, and at the same time realized her silence hurt more than any words. The neighbors, once timid, drew closer with more courage. Some whispered, others discreetly filmed on their phones. The street had become a public stage for a private story. And in moments like that, humiliation changes address. The one who seemed the victim becomes the face of justice, and the one laughing becomes the one judged. When the officers stepped out of the patrol car, Mark tried to keep his posture. He spoke loudly, cracked jokes, as if trying to impress, but his voice carried a nervous tremor. I simply waited for the right moment and handed over the documents. No long speeches, just the weight of paper. Funny how sometimes a single record has more power than 1,000 justifications. The officer flipped through the documents calmly while Mark tried one more laugh, but it no longer carried the same weight. It was hollow, almost desperate. Sarah, beside him, twisted her hands, unable to find solid ground, and I stood there, calm, knowing the sweetest revenge is simply letting the truth appear in plain sight. The flashing lights reflected off the walls, the neighbors' faces, even into my eyes. Each blink a reminder, justice doesn't shout, it arrives quietly, transforming everything. Mark began to realize it. His confidence melted away like ice under the sun, because no arrogance survives against undeniable proof. The emotion in that moment was indescribable. I didn't just feel relief, I felt liberation. The humiliation that once felt final now became fuel for my dignity. And looking at Sarah, I realized this was the moment she would be forced to face her choices. The weight of the sirens wasn't only mine, it was hers too. I knew from then on, nothing would be the same. The neighbors would talk about it for days, maybe weeks, but more importantly, the lesson had been delivered. Because there is no revenge more powerful than exposing the truth in public. And deep down, Mark wasn't laughing anymore. He was only waiting for the verdict that was about to crush his arrogance. It was in that contrast, his false confidence, her panic, and my calm, that I realized the turn had already begun. The sirens didn't just light up the street, they lit up the reality. That house had never stopped being mine. The officer held the documents with the steady calm of someone used to separating lies from truth. Mark, still trying to posture, insisted it was all a misunderstanding. But one look at his eyes was enough. The confidence he flaunted minutes before had already crumbled. And Sarah, now in tears, seemed finally awake to the weight of her choices. The officer's words were simple, but they landed like hammer blows. This man is the rightful owner of the house. You have no rights here. In that instant, Mark's mask collapsed. The laughter that once echoed now fell into shameful silence. He searched for words, but they all rang empty. Sarah tried to justify herself, saying she just wanted peace, that she thought she was doing the right thing, but her words broke apart, lacking conviction, because deep down, she knew. When she stayed silent instead of defending her father, she chose the wrong side. And life, in that very moment, made her pay the price in front of everyone. That's the power of truth. It doesn't need embellishment. It doesn't need shouting. When it arrives, it dismantles every piece of the lie. Mark, who moments earlier seemed to hold control, now looked like an intruder caught red-handed. The same man who laughed the loudest now couldn't even meet my eyes. Humiliation had changed sides. I stood firm, without raising my voice, because dignity isn't proven with aggression, but with serenity. As Mark shrank and Sarah wept, I realized this wasn't just a legal victory, it was a moral one. Justice had returned to me what they tried to strip away, respect. And suddenly, all the weight I carried dissolved into silence. The neighbors, who had been whispering before, now looked at me with different eyes. They no longer saw a defeated man, but someone who had resisted and prevailed. Funny how quickly opinions change once the truth comes out. The street, which once seemed like the stage of my shame, had become the witness of my liberation. Sarah, through sobs, tried to come closer. Her eyes begged for forgiveness, but no words could escape her lips, and I understood. Regret doesn't erase the pain of betrayal overnight. It takes time. It takes rebuilding. But at that moment, there was no room for resentment, only the certainty that the truth had won. And so, while Mark fell silent and Sarah wept, I realized the hardest fall isn't material, it's moral. Because when you try to take what isn't yours, you lose something far greater, respect. And without respect, no victory lasts. Mark was escorted out by the police, and for the first time, that night, there were no laughs, no taunts, no challenges, only the sound of boots against the floor, and a heavy silence that carried more shame than any words could. He entered the patrol car with his head down, and the scene was clear. The man who had tried to throw me out of my own house was now the real intruder being expelled. Sarah stood frozen in the middle of the living room, tears streaming down her face, with nothing to hold on to. Her silence screamed louder than any explanation. It was as if, in that instant, she finally understood that family isn't built on convenience, but on respect. And respect, once broken, cannot be restored with quick apologies. I closed the door slowly, not as someone seeking revenge, but as someone closing a chapter. Inside me, a phrase echoed. A family without respect isn't a home, it's a prison. And in that instant, I finally felt free. The humiliation I had endured at the table, on the street, and in front of neighbors had turned into liberation. Not because they recognized it, but because I stood firm. Sarah tried to speak, but swallowed her words. I knew remorse had arrived, but I also knew some wounds don't heal with a simple, "I'm sorry." They require time. They require actions. Her silence was an admission that her choice had come at a high cost. As I walked through the house, every wall seemed to breathe relief. I looked at the portraits, the furniture, every corner carrying the memory of a lifetime, and I knew that nothing, absolutely nothing, could be erased by one night of betrayal. My dignity was intact, and no one could ever take that from me. I closed the curtains, turned off the lights, and sat in the living room chair. It wasn't just the end of a turbulent day. It was the beginning of a new awareness. Because when you face betrayal with strength, you discover that true revenge isn't about destroying. It's about proving you haven't lost yourself. And deep down I knew life would still make Sarah face the consequences of her choices. But that was no longer my responsibility. I had fulfilled my role, not just as a father, but as a man who refuses to bow to humiliation. And that certainty was the greatest victory of all. Now let me ask you, how many times have you stayed silent in the face of humiliation, thinking there was no way out? How many times have you allowed someone else's silence to be louder than your own voice? The truth is, no one has the right to strip you of your dignity, and that's the biggest lesson this story carries. And I want to challenge you. Isn't it time you re-examine the relationships you call family? Because true family doesn't imprison, doesn't expel, doesn't humiliate. True family builds, respects, and uplifts. If today you feel like you're living in an emotional prison, maybe it's time to seek your liberation. Think about it. What would you have done in my place? Called the police like I did? Kept proof of your own story? Or simply walked away in silence? I want to know your opinion. Write it in the comments because your voice matters, and it may inspire others going through the same situation. And of course, if this story moved you, don't stop here. Subscribe to the channel right now, turn on notifications, and keep watching more stories like this. Because each video brings not only emotion, but also lessons of respect, dignity, family, and liberation.